Commissioner Gorelick.
Thank you for your testimony today. It is very provocative, enormously helpful, and I personally wish we had had you at the outset of this hearing rather than the end, because your comments would have informed both the public and our questions. And I'm sorry that we have so little time with you today. I'd like to start with Mr. Hauer. Is it your view that the failure to have a common and interoperable radio system between the police department and the fire department was a failure of will or a failure of technology?
Combination of both. The technology was evolving and still evolves, and interoperable radio communications is still a problem. But there are solutions. We had an 800 megahertz system in this city that allowed EMS, fire, and PD to talk on a command channel. There was little support for it.
Had that system been in place on September 11th, 2001, is it your view that the drastic communications failures that we have seen within the fire department and between the fire department and the police department would have been ameliorated?
It would have helped. It certainly would have helped. It would not have helped with the handy-talkie problem that occurred in the building when the repeaters went down, but I think it would have helped if we had an interoperable communication system that allowed the helicopters to talk to the command post. But it's not just radios, as Dennis has emphasized, it's also a culture. And the culture was and continues to be one where there is not a joint command post, and it is very difficult. We worked at it for 4 years. Under the mayor, we were able to push it very hard, and we were able to get it done. But it is a culture where the police go about doing what they do, and it is at the smaller incidents that evolve that you start off with the two command posts, and then they remain separated, and getting them together is very difficult.
So your recommendation, and I take it, and I'll ask this question of Mr. Smith as well, is for both a very strong central command in the form of an OEM that can make decisions and a mandating of bringing together of the command center. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think that, as I said in my comments, as long as you have duplication of roles in the agencies, as long as the police department has hazardous materials response capability and collapse rescue response capabilities, there are going to be problems.
Mr. Smith, would you like to address that issue and also the issue of joint training? As I understand it, your view is that without that the absence of joint training for a disaster of the sort that we had on 9/11 here was in large part responsible for the lack of coordination in the response.
Well, I think that there are a lot of training meetings that occurred before 9/11, and particularly under Jerry Hauer's auspices, there were many joint drills between the police department and the fire department. They were not regularized, and they were not codified. You know, they were just sort of developed. And we had one last Saturday here in New York. I feel that the police department emergency services and the fire department rescue services have to train together all the time. They have to get to know each other. They have to understand each other. The problem is they train separately. And their culture, as Jerry said, is a very separate and distinctive culture. Police officers are very different from firefighters, although they begin their careers demographically identical. As they develop in their institutions, they become, you know, part of that service with the love and the respect and the enthusiasm for that institution, and they exclude all the others. I think that in the future we should seek to bring them together as often as we possibly can in a regularized and codified way.
So we should not take too much comfort in the fact that they had a football game.
No, or a hockey game.
Chief Plaugher, you ran a unified command at the Pentagon, is that correct?
That's correct.
and you had every discipline of first responder submitting to your unified command. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You told our staff, if I can quote you, that the lack of a unified command dramatically impacted the loss of first responder lives on 9/11 in New York City. Is that your view today?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And you told us that the chief, the fire chief of the fire department here in New York, said it is impossible to run an incident in New York City with a unified command, but that you disagreed with that. And for my last question, I would ask you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, unified command is the single most critical element of management of an incident, because what it does is it allows the incident to be managed from the basis of who's in charge of what. You know, there should never be a day when a fire chief attempts to direct or to provide directions to a police officer out on the street. That just will not be accepted, nor should it be accepted. But it is critical that that police officer fits into the incident scene, into the incident management in a very purposeful and straightforward fashion. So unified command gives you the structure for that. We as a nation have been practicing unified command, particularly on major wildfire incidents, for decades. And we have honed this down to an absolute science. And so for us to now still be struggling with this is a little bit unconscionable for a lot of us in the profession. In March of '01, the fire chiefs and the police chiefs from the entire Washington metropolitan region spent 2 full days at the National Fire Academy making sure that we clearly understood the National Incident Command System that was being taught at that time, the National Fire Academy, and that we had worked out regional differences between those groups and left those 2 days agreeing that unified command was how we were going to operate. And on 9/11, that's exactly what we did.
And I take it then, and this is my final question, that you believe that the way things work here in New York City is an outlier.
I'm sorry, what was that?
That is an outlier, that it is not consistent with the way unified commands work in the rest of the nation.
I think that if, in fact, what I'm hearing from the periphery and those types of things, that they are struggling with understanding the concept of who's in charge of what, and that's where senior leaders sit down in a room, a very private room, and they divvy up what has to be done on the incident scene, and they decide who's going to be responsible for what needs to be done. And that's a conscious effort that has to go on, and they have to come to agreement and consensus, and they have to leave there and then pass that down their chains of command so that everybody in the incident scene fully understands what their role is, and then they go about the business of doing it and doing it right. Because remember now, what has to happen is that as progress is made, it has to be reported back up to the incident commander, back up to the unified command, so that the appropriate incident action plans can be developed. Because incidents are complex. This is no longer the day where there's a guy standing out in the front yard with a portable radio and tells people what to do. We are in a very complex, very threatening environment that needs to have a very structured response pattern available for it.
Thank you very much.